Hello, and welcome to episode 17 of the In the Clutch podcast. My name is Drew Clutchy, and this week I'm actually not here alongside my co host, Jeremy Wilson. Due to the coordination of Easter weekend, Jer and I weren't able to line up to record the podcast this week, but we wanted to make sure, given the start of the NBA playoffs, that we get an episode out. So this week, I'm here alongside a close friend of mine, Mitchell Adamson. How are you doing today, Mitch?
I'm doing great, Drew. Really excited to be on this podcast. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. It's great to have you on. I'm sure the listeners are looking forward to getting some new voices in here. We're hoping to bring on some more guests as we roll into the summer months and the season starts to finish up. So if you want to be on the In the Clutch podcast, shoot me a message and let me know because I'd love to have some more friends on
Yeah, for
here.
sure. We'll see how it goes.
So absolutely. So we got through the playing games this week, and boy, were they ever exciting. I love the play-in tournament system.
Yes, sir. I think a lot more other
It's
sports should
such
adopt it as well, just like hockey.
It's well, and it prevents the tanking of teams, right? Because normally in other leagues, like especially hockey and previously in basketball, especially in basketball, the better teams with the better players win like a lot. Like you have multiple teams that get 62 wins in a season, and then a lot of teams that are like 20 wins and 62 losses. So I think to have that 8, 9, 10 teams that are kind of contending for the play in, and then 11 and 12 are just on the outside looking in. So they're also looking to get into the play in. I think it just makes everything a lot more exciting overall because now instead of having 5 teams tank in every conference, there's only 2 of them.
Yes, definitely. I mean, this year you'll see it like the Pelicans. They weren't expected to do good. They didn't really do good in the first half of the season, but right now they're playing Phoenix for the first round, and I think they're going to put up a decent fight. They probably are going to get swept, but I like the concept of the play-in.
Absolutely. The Pelicans are a good basketball team. Like, I was not high on the Pelicans generally on the season because I'm not a believer in Zion, and I know Zion sank your fantasy basketball
Oh
team.
yeah.
Like you having Zion was like the top. It was great on draft day, and then that was your whole season shot right there.
Yep. I really should have dropped them.
But I'm yeah, exactly. Well, it's tricky, right? Because it's your best player. But so I wasn't super high on the Pelicans, but CJ can ball, and seeing CJ play point guard now because he was obviously always playing alongside Damian Lillard. CJ is a natural point guard. He's averaging like 25 and 8, like 8 assists since he got to the Pelicans. And then you combine that with they have Brandon Ingram, JV. If Zion ever decides to play again, their rookie Herb Jones is in the run for Defensive Player of the Year, and he's not going to win it. And actually, I guess they just announced the top 3 yesterday. He didn't make the top 3, but he might make All NBA first team for defense. The Pelicans have a complete roster.
Yeah. Do you know who did get nominated yesterday for Defensive Player of the Year?
Defensive Player of the Year is Rudy Gobert, and then I'll just pull up Rudy Gobert, Mikal Bridges, and Marcus Smart actually.
Marcus Smart.
Which traditionally, so guards don't win Defensive Player of the Year. Like the last guard to win was Gary Payton in the 90s or the
Yeah.
early 2000s or something, and Marcus Smart has spoken out about that guards don't win, but guards just don't have the same impact on defense. So in recent non-bigs to win Defensive Player of the Year include Kawhi's won it twice. And Kawhi's obviously, we watched him guard Giannis in the playoffs when he was with the Raptors. Kawhi is a stud on defense. And that's why I think Mikal Bridges could win it this year, and the numbers favor him. But guards don't win just because if you're a guard and you're guarding one person on the perimeter, and then maybe you jump in as a help defender and get a steal, it doesn't have the same impact on as guarding the rim. Every single possession of a basketball game, the ball is going to the rim in one way or another.
Oh, for sure. That's why I think Rudy Gobert, I mean, he's kind of slept on, but he's the best player in the league in that aspect. He grabs like 14 rebounds a game, probably 3+ blocks, and he's a defensive anchor for the Jazz.
Absolutely. And I always complain about I hate the concept of voter fatigue because I feel that when you're electing, like, it's the same thing. Giannis could win MVP every single year. And people say that Giannis is just doing what he did last year, but that's still good enough. Every single season is its own individual season. It's not in comparison to what you've done,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So when I look at that, I'm thinking like Rudy Gobert, I'd still pick him as Defensive Player of the Year this year. Maybe, and I know that advanced analytics favor Mikal Bridges slightly, so that would be maybe maybe he could win it. But Marcus Smart as a guard, I just don't think guards can do enough right now, given how much the bigs do around the paint.
Oh, definitely. Um, who'd be your take for DPOY this year? Gobert?
Gobert.
Yeah,
I think I hate the voter fatigue thing. I think he's just too much of a stud on defense still.
yeah. I mean, it sounds kind of like a boring
So
pick, but he is the right choice in my view.
it's a safe bet, in my opinion. So after that little side tangent here, let's jump into the playing game. So my favorite thing is the Timberwolves, who won their second playing game, and celebrating like they won the championship.
Hey, I'm all for
Like
that.
Pat Bev was up on the scorers table, like they were running around, they were cheering, everybody was so hyped. And mind you, the Timberwolves don't normally make the playoffs, and I know it's like Cat's only made the playoffs. This might be only his second time or something. Anthony Edwards first time in the playoffs, but they were having a party. Like it was like they won the conference finals or something.
Oh yeah. No, I don't I'm not gonna put a knock on them at all. You know what? Celebrate as hard as you want. It might not be the NBA Finals, but it's emotional. Pat Bev got traded from the Clippers last year, and he deserves it.
Yeah, which I guess that was probably exciting for him personally, and he played a great game. Like I know I'm not a huge fan on Pat Bev just because of the offensive limitations of him. It's like he can't doesn't shoot the ball very well. He's very small, like generally speaking, so he can't like he didn't dunk or anything. But he is a player that you want on the court guarding a guard in the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter in any game.
Oh, definitely. He's a pest. I mean, that's the best way to describe him.
He's a pest.
I,
And when there was about sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say how Westbrook described him. He's Westbrook's like, yeah, he just runs around the court and pretends to play defense. But I think he does a little more than that now. He
Yeah, I think he does a great job. And it's interesting because when you look at him, so there was about a minute and a half left, and the Clippers were up by about 4, so the game was probably over. But in this last moment, Reggie Jackson came running up the floor, and Pat Bev just stripped the ball right out of his hands and went the other way, and that was the dagger play. And when you look at that, Marcus Smart does the same thing for the Celtics. That's the player you want. They're not useless throughout the whole game because obviously they play good defense, but to me they're a net zero for a lot of the game because the defense that Pat Bev plays throughout the game is great, but then he scores few points, doesn't shoot the ball at a great percentage, so it costs you on the other side when you can't hit the open shot.
yeah.
So he's a net zero throughout the game, but when you get into those late game situations, those defensive scrappy guards who I guess, like you said, described as a pest, that's who I want on the court.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, this is gonna be getting away from the playing game a little bit, but at least on the Raptors, we're big Raptors fans. I think Gary Trent Jr. He's one of the best in the league with doing that as well.
Yeah, and he's like I've quickly started to love Gary Trent Jr. Initially, I was a fan, like I love Norman Powell, and I understand. I always describe that trade as a changing of timelines.
Hmm.
So like Gary Trent Jr. in my opinion is going to end up as good as Norman Powell was. I know a lot of people have higher aspirations for Trent Jr., but frankly, Norman Powell last season on the Raptors had one of the highest 3-point percentages in the league. He's a pretty good defender. He can get to the rim. And when he played as a starter, his stats were always elevated in comparison to coming off the bench. So I don't actually personally think that Trent has a higher ceiling than Norman Powell did or does, or I guess you'd argue Norman Powell's at his ceiling.
Hmm.
But to change the timelines, and now that I've seen Trent play a little bit more, I'm really pleased with what I've seen from him on the court.
Oh, definitely. Especially this year, though. I mean, last year, at least when I was looking at the numbers, he didn't have great defensive numbers. He would be either hot and cold, go 3 for 19, or maybe like 7 for 9 in a game. But this year, I think like
Right.
he's definitely stepped up his consistency and really going back to Pat Bev. I mean, like Pat Bev will give you the defense, but he won't ever go 7 for 9 on threes or have a good
Right.
offensive showing. So that's the trade-off for him.
Well, and that's why you hit it bang on. Like Gary Trent, to me, even though in the last 2 minutes of the game, Gary Trent, in my opinion, wouldn't have as much of an effect on the game as Pat Bev was, or Pat Bev will or would. But given what he can do throughout the rest of the game, I'd actually rather have a Gary Trent than I would Pat Bev.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think Pat
To
Bev's more of a role player, but Trent, like, you can have him in your starting lineup.
And especially too, like we're lucky. The problem is the Raptors are such a weird team this year, which I guess now we'll transition to Raptors Sixers and loop back to the playing game. We're so big in terms of like everybody's 6'8", except we don't have a center, so we're not that big. And then Gary Trent and Freddie are both kind of small. So like we're big at small forward, but small at guard. So we're kind of like this weird mixed bag team. And I don't know if you saw this or not, but so the Raptors got cranked in game 1 against the Sixers. It was absolutely disgusting. The entire game, it was never close. And Embiid landed on Scotty Barnes' ankle, and Scotty Barnes is now going to miss game 2, and Thad Young is going to miss game 2. And Gary Trent, who looked awful the entire game, turns out he's battling a non-COVID illness, and he's probably going to miss game 2. So game 2 is basically already a wash, and then we're going to go back to Toronto down 0-2.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, hey, in the playoffs, I mean, anything can happen. It certainly does not look good for the Raptors, but still, I would not be surprised if they make it close this time. Um, I'm not
I
sure.
I'm voting on another blowout.
You're voting on another blowout? Well, I think the
I
spread,
think it's going to be a
the
blowout.
spread's what, 7.5 points, something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
It's it's going to be interesting. I don't know. I'm really lost for I'm just so disappointed because if we're gonna switch everything, right? We have Achua and Boucher and Siakam and Barnes, and we're gonna switch, and OG as well. Losing one player out of that rotation when we're already up against a center like Embiid, who's frankly obviously top 3 in MVP. It'd be different if we were in a series where the best center was like Nurkic or
yeah.
something. But I think losing another player out of that rotation of switching everything, and then also I guess losing Thaddeus Young too, I think that's really going to hurt us over 48 minutes tonight.
Oh, definitely. I'm not sure what the Raptors, like their game logs were against Embiid for the year, but at least listening to Nick Nurse, like little tidbits, what he says. He says you basically just have to try and wall him off, like him or Giannis, the guys who are really dominant and get to the rim. And if you lose your biggest player, a 20-year-old Scotty Barnes, another 6'8" player, Thaddeus Young, that job gets a lot harder when you have Chris Boucher trying to guard Joel Embiid.
Well, that's exactly it. And the problem is, like, when you're walling off, it's the same with walling off Giannis. You're never going to wall off Giannis and stop him from scoring or something. But with these star players, you just have to stop them from scoring 36.
Yeah,
Like, if you can hold Kyrie or KD or Giannis or Embiid or pick your poison on any other player, if you can hold them to 28, 8, and 4 on like a relatively inefficient shooting split, that's fine. I was watching the Celtics and Nets yesterday, which that's been the best game of the playoffs so far. Came all the way down to the end, and the Nets were down by like 10 for most of the game. And then Kyrie hit like 3 threes in a row at the start of the fourth quarter with KD on the bench. They battle it all the way down to the end. And then the Nets blow coverage, and Tatum just gets like an easy bucket at the rim with no time on the clock to end the game, and Celtics win by 1. But in a game like that, the problem is the Nets have nobody to guard Tatum. Like maybe you can put Durant on him, but as a full time, like if Durant goes off the floor or something, they have nobody to guard Tatum. And Tatum at the end of the first quarter, into the second quarter, he had like one shot taken. Like he'd hit 3 free throws or something. He'd taken one shot, but he already had like 7 assists. So then you end up with Jason Tatum, where now you're in the fourth quarter, and he figured out his scoring, started taking more shots. So now he has 31 points and also 10 assists, and that's when you really reach a problem against teams like that. And the Raptors have to avoid doing that against Embiid.
oh for sure. I think well Tatum yesterday, like you said, throughout the whole game, he didn't really take too many shots, but I think at one point it was on the 17 baskets made by the Celtics. I think 15 of them had assists. So
Right.
they're sharing the basketball. The offense was flowing. And I mean, is there really a good defense to that? I mean, you can try and wall off the best players, but I mean, Maxey going off against the Raptors for 38, he had to have some open
Yeah.
looks, maybe drives to the rim. It's just kind of hard to contain that.
Well, and that's the situation. I thought the Raptors and the Nets looked the same against their respective teams, which is that you forget how aggressive and intense playoff games are in comparison to regular season games. Like it's not even close. And I thought both the Raptors and the Nets just frankly looked outmatched throughout the entire game.
Yeah, I'd agree with
Like
you.
you see if you look at the Celtics, like I was watching the Celtics yesterday, and like the Nets are able to force them. Like they get the ball out of Tatum's hands, he swings it to Brown, they close out on Brown, and then they get all the way over, and like now the ball goes to Derek White in the corner, and Derek White is like a solid NBA player, right? Versus on the other end, when the Nets they get the ball to Kevin Durant's hands, it goes to Kyrie, Kyrie kicks it, and you have like Bruce Brown in the corner. There's a big gap from Derek White shooting the corner three to Bruce Brown. And if you extend that over 48 minutes, I thought that the Nets just look like they're not going to win a championship. Like they're too outmatched player for player. And when you see it was the same against the Cavs in the playing game, when you look at the situation they're in where they have Kyrie and Kevin Durant both playing like 41 minutes. And Kyrie was extremely efficient and hit like two big clutch threes with 10 minutes to go in the fourth to bring the game within contention. And they still lost.
Yeah.
And against the Cavs, same thing. Like Kyrie and Kevin Durant both had great games. They played tons of minutes and they barely beat the Cavs without Jared Allen. So there's no doubt in my mind that the Nets will steal a few games, but they're not winning a championship.
Oh no. I mean, hypothetically, say they do get past Boston. You think they're gonna be able to match up against Milwaukee as well? I mean, I wouldn't think so. KD and Kyrie, they can. I mean, like they were down 15 this past game. They can carry you back, but carrying you to a championship, that's a whole different matter. It's a team effort for
Well, and
that.
the interesting thing is, Kevin Durant said at the end of last year in an interview that had they beaten the Milwaukee Bucks on the shot where his toe was on the 3-point line, and they obviously they got beat by the Bucks, and the Bucks went on to win it all. Katie said that people always say to him, "Oh, like you guys would have won the championship, but you gotten past the Bucks." And he was like, "No, like Kyrie Irving, there was no chance Kyrie was coming back apparently because of his ankle." And like Kevin Durant said that he was playing 40, he averaged 46 minutes a game in that series. So he was like, I was gassed. Kyrie wasn't coming back. Like he's like, there was no chance that we were actually going to win anything after how we gotten past the Bucks.
Yep.
And to me, the Nets look the same this year. Now, the big difference between the Nets and the Lakers is if you look at the Nets, they have a good team. The people just aren't on the court. So, like, when you look at the Nets, Joe Harris out for season, a total sniper, which not only does that give them a little bit of size, but it spreads the floor out a little bit more because Joe Harris, like, he's led the league in 3-point percentage, so he can snipe from anywhere. And if you're dumping to him for the corner three, that's a bucket. LaMarcus Aldridge, who is having actually a relatively efficient and solid offensive season, he's out. So they're missing, like, that's two major players right there. And then obviously not to mention Ben Simmons.
Yep.
So even if you come back, let's say Ben Simmons is now like a fringe all-star for the rest of his career, like kind of near the all-star game, but never really makes it, kind of like a CJ McCollum.
Yep.
If you get a CJ McCollum level player out of Ben Simmons, and then they still have Aldridge and they have Joe Harris coming back, that's a good basketball team. Versus the Lakers, everybody's old, they have no picks, no assets left, and they're screwed.
Definitely. Well, staying on the Nets, I mean, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but at least last year in the playoffs, like Blake Griffin was the man guarding Giannis, and he just doesn't play this year.
Right. Oh yeah, I forgot Blake's not playing either.
So at least for me, I mean, they probably have their reasons, but like he would be the guy. I don't know if you'd guard Tatum in this series, but at least he can match up somewhat physically compared to Durant or
Yeah,
anybody else.
that's true as well. And the interesting thing too with the Nets is like when you watch them against the Celtics, like they have Seth Curry, Kyrie Irving, and Patty Mills all on the court at the same time. And based on how their rotations work, and like on defense, like sometimes they end up with Seth Curry guarding the paint.
Yeah.
So like they're playing a zone and they've got like Claxton's on the top with Tatum, right? And if Claxton's the only big on the floor, they've got Claxton on Tatum, and then KD is on Al Horford, and Al Horford's in the corner. And then all of a sudden, the way everybody's spread out, Seth Curry's in the paint. So then you have Jaylen Brown like crashing through Kyrie Irving, and then the help defender is Seth Curry. So like there's no help defender. Like no offense to Seth Curry, but there's no help defender there. So then they have the Celtics who, as soon as they get by their primary defender, it's a breakaway to the basket.
Yeah. And I mean, again, that's how they got 15 assists on the 17 field goals. At least I don't know when that
Right.
was in the game, but like that's pretty good.
No, exactly. So to me, the Nets are not going to win this year because Kyrie and KD have to do too much to even almost steal a game against the Celtics, let alone win the championship or win a series even. I don't think they'll get past the Celtics. But I have so much more hope for the Nets going forward than I do the Lakers.
Oh yeah.
Just because the Nets have actual assets and they're actually like when the Nets say they're riddled by injuries, that's actually true. Versus when the Lakers are like, "Oh, we're riddled by injuries. Anthony Davis isn't playing." I'm like, "Yeah, but you still only have Anthony Davis and LeBron and a kind of okay Russell Westbrook."
No, definitely. I mean, the whole year, at least Charles Barkley would rip on the Lakers for being old geezers. I think they're the oldest team in the league by average age of at least like 3 years. They don't have any
Which is
draft picks
ridiculous.
until, or first rounders until like what, 2027? Something crazy
Yeah,
like that.
27.
And I mean, they just have no assets to get younger. Like,
Exactly. So I think they'll have to do the reverse of the Russell Westbrook trade, which is trade Russell Westbrook for like a few different contracts that aren't as bad, like a Kuzma type deal, which actually Kuzma had a good year this year
mhm,
in his rebound in Washington, but like I think they'll have to trade for contracts like that or like one of the Morris brothers or something, like a contract where the guy's making 22 million but not really like shouldn't be getting 22 million anymore, maybe like a Nurkic kind of deal.
yeah,
And then that'll slowly, the further they break down, so like they'll take Russell Westbrook and they'll break it into a few players and then break those few players into picks or something. And not that that'll fix their problem, but I think you might as well, if you're going to have Westbrook or if you're going to have LeBron and AD, you might as well just have LeBron and AD because I actually think Westbrook is really a net zero, but he's really an expensive net zero for
mhm.
the team.
Like I think for the
So that
Lakers, I I think they've screwed it up so bad. If I was Rob Pelinka right now, like the only choice I would see is to blow the team up. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Westbrook's around for another year. I think James has another year in his contract. I don't know about AD, but I don't think they're winning anything anytime soon.
So would you blow up the entire team, like dump LeBron and AD too, or just keep LeBron and AD and move the pieces around?
No, I would trade everything. Get value while you can out of LeBron and AD. Because I mean LeBron, I'm not sure what he's gonna do, but he really wants to play with Bronny. So if Bronny does not go to the
Right.
Lakers,
And he really wants to play with Steph Curry.
yes, Steph Curry too. Matt, LeBron, Steph, Bronny all on the same team.
Might as well throw KD on there just for fun.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd do it.
We'll recreate the 2018 Warriors, except we'll do LeBron. Yeah, and honestly, the blowing up the Lakers, that's an interesting approach. And I know I've heard it bounced around a few different times now. And you have to remember, the Lakers won a championship. So like that's enough where the Raptors won a championship and they partially blew everything up and kind of kept what they could. Like obviously they got rid of Gasol and they got rid of Ibaka and Kawhi. Danny Green is gone. But if you look at the Lakers, like they won the chip. So if they do blow everything up, I actually don't think that's unreasonable. The only thing for me is LeBron, even at his current age, is not like other superstars to me. Like LeBron is LeBron James. So it's not like having like I'm trying to think maybe a Giannis or something or Kawhi even where you might win another or you might not. But like LeBron goes to the finals like every other year or every year potentially, right? So he's like that little bit above other superstars to me. Or it's kind of like Damon Harden. Like Damon Harden, you might win one, you might not. You might make the finals, might not, kind of thing, or the conference finals. But to break the team down and get rid of LeBron, I can't decide if that's worth the price to me.
Yeah, I mean, like I just don't see any other option for the team to go. Like if say you keep LeBron, you keep AD, you keep Westbrook, what do you do? Sign a bunch of 32-year-olds again to 1 year deals? Like,
Yeah, the develop better talent. I don't even know. They're really stuck.
yeah, you lost
Like
your head
they can go
coach as
hunt.
well. Vogel's gone.
Yep. And they've said they're gonna have a new coach by the draft, which I don't know what they're gonna do about that yet. They want Nick Nurse. I wrote if anybody's interested, go check out the Raptors Cage site. I wrote a poem to try to keep Nick Nurse around, and I think it was a phenomenal piece of work. So if you go check that out, it actually got a lot of views too. So go check that out on the Raptors Cage site. I have my own page there. But so I don't know. The Lakers are in a tricky situation, and I I know we talk about the Lakers a lot, even though like they're not in the playoffs. Like as the basketball community, the Lakers are just the center of the world. But I more brought the Lakers up to comparatively show that the Nets are actually in a great position, and the Nets aren't going to do anything this year. But I think going forward, they're cruising. But the bigger thing for me is just Kyrie and KD are both complete studs. Like I've been down on Kyrie and KD at various points throughout my basketball life on like Kyrie not playing defense, Kyrie not getting vaccinated and being away from basketball, KD talks too much on Twitter. Like there's various things. But when you watch the Nets play with both of those two players on the court, let alone the fact that they don't have like a Joe Harris around them and like Kyrie and Seth Curry are getting pinned on defense. They're both just so dangerous offensively. And then not only that, they both make clutch plays. Like KD had like 3 blocks, Kyrie had 5 steals.
Jeez, they're walking
They're just
buckets.
exactly, and they're winning players. Which that really stands out to me as an athlete because obviously, if you look at Harden, Harden's proven himself to not be a winning player. And frankly, while Dame's never had the talent around him, Dame's also not a winning player.
Yeah,
Because like nobody's really won anything with Dame. Like I think they made the conference finals once. But Kyrie and KD, not only are they buckets on offense, but they're winning players on both sides of the floor when it matters.
oh, definitely. I mean, I don't know really about Kyrie, but KD, he can hold his own defensively. Like last game, at least the commentators were giving him some praise in the paint. You know, he didn't shut Tatum down, but like he can somewhat limit him down there. But I'm really
Right.
interested to
Which
see when
nobody
Ben
can shut
Simmons,
Tatum
or
down.
if the
Tatum
Nets are
is
even
also a
alive when
player
Ben
that I've
Simmons come
noticed
back.
has. Yeah, well, maybe. And we'll have to see what kind of minutes Ben Simmons is playing. But Tatum's also a player that I've noticed has really, really improved this year. Like, because I used to think of, and even actually earlier in this season, I'm quoted on the In the Clutch podcast talking about how like Tatum and Brown switching playing iso ball back and forth, like just taking turns, isn't going to work. And Tatum's not maximizing his ability because of that. But watching them play now since January 25th ish, since they've gone on this big run to move themselves into the 2 seed, watching them play now and the acquisition of Derek White to kind of have another primary ball handler to take the ball out of Tatum and Brown's hands, I think now I can really see that Tatum could be like they talk about always who's the future of the NBA after LeBron and Steph. And I really see now Tatum in that conversation.
That's a pretty big take there. I think Tatum's really, really
Yeah.
good. But like, do you think on the level of like a KD?
Well, KD will move out. I think more interestingly, you have to say, is he on the level of Luca or Ja?
Right.
And well, I guess you could say because Giannis is obviously a little bit younger than KD and Braun and company. But to me, I consider like Braun and Steph and KD, Kyrie, Dame, all of those players to be like they're all 32, 33 and older, and they're all going to move out of the league together.
Hmm.
So then, is it Giannis's league or maybe Jokic, or then you get down to like Luca and Ja? And I'd actually, based on what I'm seeing from this playoff run so far, I'd start to put Tatum in that conversation.
Definitely. I mean, I've always liked Tatum. He has gotten some knacks for being an iso ball type of player. And
Right.
even at the start of this year, I'm not sure if you remember, but I think it was after like the second or third game, like Marcus Smart called them out. He's like, I'm hanging in the corner, waiting for open shots, but nobody's passing me the ball. And then he called out his teammates, and they've come a long way
Which
since then.
Yeah, which I didn't understand that because Marcus Smart calling out his teammates, which I guess you're right. Like now they've made it work, so all the power to them. But Marcus Smart calling out his teammates, like he's a good decision maker and shooter.
Hmm.
Like half the time you'd see Marcus Smart gets frustrated and then he just like hucks up a weird three or something, like a step back, deep two. So like I don't think Marcus Smart has the clout to call out teammates based on what's happening on offense.
No, I mean, he's a role player on offense, but then again, like, I mean, he probably just wants to win, right? And in the end,
Yeah, and frankly, they're making it happen right now, so I guess I can't complain anymore.
I'll definitely, and even like, I'm surprised, like, my favorite player on the Celtics has always been Rob Williams ever since last year. And now that he's
Right,
gone, I mean, they brought in Daniel Tice, but they're still making it work. Like, it doesn't look like they have a weakness around defending the paint.
right. And Rob Williams was also really high in the Defensive Player of the Year voting, and he'll probably make All NBA first team for defense. And I think initially when he went down, which I haven't watched a lot of Celtic basketball because they always beat the Raptors, which makes me sad. So initially when Rob Williams went down, I'd peg the Nets to win the series. But now I'm kind of reverting where I've watched a little bit more Celtics basketball and I'm like, wow, the Celtics through and through are just really, really solid. So even like when they get Rob Williams back, great, all the more power to them. They'll be even stronger defensively. But even without Rob Williams, I'm really confident in what the Celtics are going to be able to do this playoff run.
Oh, for sure. I'm not really sure. Do you know when he's like slated to come back, if he is?
Mid second round was the last update I saw.
Okay, I mean that's not
So like
too
game
far.
3 or something in the second round. Obviously, it'll be better for the Celtics if they whip through the Nets in like 5 games because that'll buy them some time off where the whole team can kind of like rehab and stuff like that and practice a little bit more. So that kind of favors because if you're going into game 7 against the Nets, you might consider playing Rob Williams early, right?
Yes,
Versus if they get them done in 5, a whole bunch of the other series will probably go 7 because it's a pretty close playoffs. Then that gives you a little bit more buffer time to figure out what you're going to do with Rob Williams.
for sure.
So I think that'd make their lives a little bit easier. So speaking of, as I went down, I just realized I left somebody important off the list of future names of the league or faces of the league. Trae Young did in his play-in game exactly what Tatum did against the Nets yesterday, which was every time he touched the ball in the first half, they just double teamed him. And Trae Young had like 8 assists in the first half and had taken like very few shots. And to me, that really stands out. And then he did it again in his second play-in game. And I bet against the Hawks, both against the Hornets and against the Cavs. I said both games, all the Hawks are going to lose. No way. And I won't bet against Trae Young like in a game like that. Like obviously I'm gonna bet against the Hawks against the Heat in the first round because
Yes,
the Heat are phenomenal. But in a one-off game like that or against a team that's fairly equivalent, Trae Young is just such an incredible decision maker.
yeah. He's the best
Like
player on the
if you need
floor.
him to exactly, and if you need him to score 40, he'll score 40. And if you need him to have 20 points and 14 assists, he'll do that too. So every time he faced a double, he just moved the ball out of his hands. And they don't even have John Collins. So add another player that he can move the ball out of his hands to who's actually pretty good. And they surround him with shooters. Like they have Herter out there and Bogdanovich, and Collins is a great 3-point shooter from the corner. Then that's a really threatening team. And you can see why they went all the way to the conference finals last year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as a team, I don't like the Hawks. Like, I don't think they're good enough defensively. But in these situations, like, I mean, everybody says, oh, a hostile
Right.
environment, game one, it's like a half court game the whole time. I mean, that is Trae Young's bread and butter. Like, he can
Right.
win you the game like that. He can do whatever. I mean, he might not be as efficient as most other players. I think he shot like sub league average on threes this year, but
Right.
like he can hit them from anywhere. He can score anywhere on the court. Right off that pick and roll. I mean, Capella's
Well,
gone right now, but
and
he
the
can either
thing
do the
is, too, when
teardrop
you look at
or
a
the
player
lob to
like Trae
Capella.
Young, oh, sorry, I cut you off there. When you look at a player like Trae Young, it's really interesting because he's the opposite. Like, mind you, Trae Young's a superstar. Or, no, I'm going to walk that back. Trae Young's an all star. He's not a superstar yet. But he's the opposite of Pat Bev, where Trae Young is a huge liability. He's like, in terms of individual defense, he's literally statistically like the worst in the
Yes.
league. But it's the same thing where if I have 2 minutes to go in the fourth quarter and I have the ball, I want Trae Young out on the floor in the same way that if I don't have the ball, I want Pat Bev out there. So when you get a player who's such a specialist on either end of the floor, you just have to keep the game close.
Yeah. They can steal it for
Because
you.
if the exactly. Like if the game's right there, then yeah, give the ball to Trae Young. Let alone like if he has already 24 and 10, that's great. And I'm sure that's what helped you keep the game close, but he's also probably cost you a lot of points on defense. But if the game is there, great. Then that's when you have Trae Young or that's when you have your Marcus Smart or Pat Bev. And to have a player who's not an all-star or not a superstar, but can help you win the game, I always think that's huge.
Yes. But then I guess that kind of goes both ways though. If you're, a game seven in a playoff series and you do have Trae Young, like he's gonna get hunted for matchups. Or just like on offense, I mean they'll leave Pat Bev open for open threes. And in the same way, it
Right.
might cost you. But I mean,
Well, and that's where to me coaching really comes in is what scheme can you run to hide your bad players? Which that's what Steve Kerr has done for a really long time very well, right? Is Steve Kerr, mind you, he had a great team. So obviously there's Draymond and Clay who are both phenomenal defenders and a 2018 Iguodala, phenomenal defender. So then whoever they put at center then you can just hide Steph Curry. So Steph Curry's always guarding like the Pat Bev in the corner or like a Larry Nance type player in the corner. And then if anybody drives on Curry, you just have Draymond come in and help and stop it, which it helps obviously to have a Hall of Fame defender on the court with you.
Yeah.
But I think it's easier to hide at the NBA level, anyways. It's easier to hide a bad defender than it is to hide a poor player on offense. It's like I'd rather have Trey Young and be hiding him on defense, guarding the corners or guarding the ball on top and having to bring in extra help than I would to have which obviously it's not fair to compare Pat Bev to Trey
No.
Young because obviously Pat Bev's not at the same level, but I'd rather have that than leaving Pat Bev open in the corner and having him miss 9 threes, or Westbrook, leaving Westbrook open in the corner and having him miss 9 threes.
No, you're definitely right there.
So I think it's easier to hide somebody on defense, and as long as they don't get into foul trouble, then you're cruising, and they'll offer you 24 points and 10 assists is like 44 points for your team or something, or 38 points for your team, right? So they're not going to cost you 38 points on defense.
And I mean, just talking about this makes me think about like the championship teams. I mean, the Bucks, like they wouldn't last year, but then you go back to, I mean, they played the Suns in the finals. Like those teams, like when it's clutch time, I don't think they have players that'll just miss like brick open threes. Like
Right.
liability is like they're complete. They all, they're in rhythm. They hit their shots. I mean, they don't have a Pat Bev offensive type player, but if you want to win a championship, I mean, the Nets obviously don't have this. You need to make those shots and have those type of
Well, that's
players.
exactly it. And if you look at like if you date it, like you're exactly right. If you date it back through the years, so the Bucks, Drew Holiday, they had Middleton, Brooke Lopez can shoot the three pretty well from the corner. Giannis last year couldn't shoot the three great, like 29% or something, but he's Giannis, so it's okay. And then they had Grayson Allen out there. Grayson Allen's a good shooter. And then if you roll back before that, year before that, the Lakers were the Lakers, LeBron and AD. I think they were starting Dwight Howard at center. And like LeBron and AD pick and roll is enough to just win you a series right there. Not to mention they had like other better role players around. And then if you date back the year before that, the Raptors, everybody could shoot.
Yes.
Like you Danny Green, you'd Freddie could shoot, Kawhi can shoot, Serge Ibaka can shoot well for a center, Gasol can shoot well for a center, Siakam can shoot. Like we didn't. Norman Powell was great. We didn't have a player that couldn't hit an open shot.
Yes.
So anytime you left somebody open because you quadruple teamed Kawhi, you got burned.
No, literally.
And that was the whole premise for making it count for us, right? So I think when you get into a situation, it's so disappointing too. And you see it with the Sixers from Matisse Thybulle, where as like the team on offense, you get a wide open shot and you know it's not going in.
Yeah.
Like if it's shot by Thibault or if it's shot by Pat Bev, or sometimes Marcus Smart's like that. Like he got 2 open threes in a row yesterday. Like open three, offensive rebound, open three, right again. And he missed both of them. And like it's so disappointing as a fan to watch that and know that that's just how it is for your team.
It's missed before it even gets thrown up.
Exactly. And sometimes you can tell too by the angle. Like you see it shot from the corner and you know it's going to hit like it's too far left and it's going to hit the front of the rim and roll out even though it was shot from the corner. And it's just like, especially like if it's in the fourth quarter or something, you're so excited when you get an open three and then you can just feel yourself deflating when you know it's not going to go.
Oh yeah.
And you know, not only is it not going to go just because it was a bad shot, but because you have a player who's a liability on offense.
Oh, definitely. So I mean, while we're here, we kind of got off topic a little bit, but I mean, I want to keep talking about this Celtics Nets series because I think every game, like there won't be a blowout. They're all going to be within
No,
five
I think
points.
every game will be incredible. It's a tricky series to bet on.
Yes. Yes. Who do you take in game two?
I have not decided yet. Game 2 is not until
Yeah,
Wednesday, I
spread
think.
out, isn't it?
Yeah, and then so they're I think it's because they want to keep Nets Boston prime time as much as they can. So they're Wednesday, Saturday. Like both games are spread out. So Sunday, Wednesday, Saturday. I honestly haven't decided yet. I need more time to like digest what I saw yesterday. Because frankly, how the game ended, I think is a really accurate depiction of the series, where it was a blown coverage for the Nets on defense and Tatum getting an easy bucket.
Yeah.
And so I don't know who I'm going to pick long term on that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. What are you going?
Well, I'll get to that in a second. It kind of leads in after this thing I'm going to say. When I was watching game one, I'm thinking, okay, Brooklyn has to win this game or else they're not going to win the series. Like they're getting
Right,
outmatched defensively. They need to steal one in Boston, and of course it didn't happen. But I
right,
think, like even though they were getting killed, the game was so close. I still think that they have another shot. I mean, I don't think they'll win the series, but I think they'll win this next game. It's just KD and
right,
Kyrie will both go off if, they don't get locked down, which pretty much happens when you're playing the Celtics.
right.
So I would
And then
take the Nets this next game.
1-1 going back to Brooklyn, I think, is huge for the Nets.
Definitely.
Because given obviously it's really disappointing if you are the Nets that game one was so close, but you still lost. So to be able to steal one in the Garden, which obviously the Garden in Boston, both for the Bruins and for the Celtics, is a really tough place for opposing teams. To steal one and take it back to Brooklyn, I think that puts you in a stronger situation for the overall series. So I'm not even gonna go as far to say I'm not gonna make some big quote like, oh, if the Nets lose game two, the series is over, or vice versa. Because like you said, every game is just going to be so close that there's no way to like predict it one way or the other, in my opinion.
No, for sure. I mean, I'm just trying to find it right now. I can't really do it, but I don't think the Nets were that good at home this year. So it's, at least to me, it's not
Well,
the same
to be
impact.
fair, Kyrie Irving didn't play at
That
home.
is true. That is, yeah, that is true.
So that kind of because Kyrie couldn't play at home until like the final 2 weeks of the season or 4 weeks of the season or something.
Yeah, right.
So that hurts your home record a little bit more.
Yeah, just a little bit.
But the other thing that's really stood out to me so far in the playoffs, which I'm trying to remember as I think back, if playoffs are always like this or not, but the fouls have been brutal. Like Carl Anthony Towns and the Timberwolves in their playing game, like their first playing game, like Cat fouled out with like 7 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and there were a whole bunch of other starters on both teams at like 4 and 5,
Yeah.
like 4 and 5 fouls respectively. And then I watched Memphis and the Timberwolves, which by the way, I think that's a sneaky exciting series because I think even though Memphis is the 2 seed, they're really young and it's kind of like for a lot of them their first kind of shot at the playoffs, and then it's the same for Minnesota.
Yep.
So I think even though Memphis is the 2 seed, that's a sneaky exciting series. But like same thing there, like both teams were just in disgusting foul trouble. And then yesterday, the Celtics game, Bruce Brown got into foul trouble early. Drummond got into foul trouble. Like I think Tice might have been in foul trouble, and then Horford got in foul trouble, and they brought Tice back in because Horford was in foul trouble. Like there have just been in all of the games, like without fail, somebody in the first quarter has 3 fouls.
Yeah.
And then by the second quarter, there's like two people, one with 4 and one with 3. And then you get into the third quarter, and there's like a 5, a 4, and 2 threes on each team. Like every single game, it's been foul after foul after foul after foul. And players are like seeing their minutes limited just because of that.
Do you think, I mean, because of that, all these fouls, do you think the refs are calling the game right? Or do you think, I mean, just to keep the star players on the court, well, maybe not even star players, but at least, starters on the court, they should be a bit more lenient with their calls.
Well, I think some of the fouls, well, a lot of the fouls, frankly, I guess, they're calling right.
Like they are
But where
fouls.
I see yeah, they are fouls. But like watching the Celtics game yesterday, they were just letting like coming around every single screen, they were just letting the Celtics mug Kyrie and KD.
Yeah.
Like just bash them and swipe at the ball and hit them in the wrists and stuff every time they came around a screen. So like a lot of like the charges and stuff for fouls and the shooting fouls and all that kind of stuff. But then also like I'm seeing an extra like or an extra couple illegal screen fouls and stuff like that per game. And that's when you see a player who'd normally be at 3 fouls, now he's at 4 or 5, right?
Hmm.
Is when they call like some weird illegal screen thing or a loose ball, an extra like loose ball foul. So I think I'm seeing like it's the same amount of shooting fouls, but both teams, and not just for the Nets Celtics game, but for a lot of the games I've seen, both teams are in bonus with like 6 minutes to go on a quarter.
Yeah. Yeah. Like net Celtics exactly. I'm not sure what time it was in the game. I think it was like halfway through the second quarter, and they're like, "Yeah, there's been 26 fouls in the game so far." It's like
Yeah,
Jesus.
and it's been tricky for the NBA because over Saturday, Sunday, and Easter and Good Friday as well, I guess. They've been running like a 1 o'clock game and then a 3:30 game and then a 6 o'clock game and then an 8:30 game and then like a 10:30 game if they need it, like depending on how many teams play. And you can literally see like 2.5 hours for a regular season game is fine. The game's done in 2 hours and 21 minutes.
Hmm.
But all of the games are running late because there's so many fouls. So like the Raptors game, if you tune into the feed, it's like a 24-minute late tip off. Like they're almost, even though the game starts at 6, it's almost 6:30 by the time we're tipping off because we're waiting for the other game to finish. Because the NBA obviously wants it so you can watch every minute of every broadcast.
Hmm.
And we're waiting for the other game to finish, but because there are so many fouls in every single game of the day, the broadcasts are literally falling behind.
Yes. No, definitely. I mean, we went
So
to.
that's something I've noticed.
I was just gonna say, like, we all went to, went out to go watch the game, and it's like, oh yeah, 6 o'clock start time for the Raptors. It's past 6:30, and still haven't started.
I know. And I got a notification on my phone because I was watching the Timberwolves game before, and I got a notification on my phone that the Raptors feed was live. So then I switched over, even though I wanted to see the final 5 minutes of the Timberwolves game. And when I got over to the other TSN channel, I was like, oh no, they're just like talking about stuff and killing time. They kept going back to Kate Burness in studio and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, we're fine. I've got some time here.
Oh yeah,
So then that's when I realized, yeah, they're not going to start the other game. Like they're not going to start the Raptors game until the Timberwolves game is done.
and at least
But the other thing too is I've seen a lot of players take really dumb fouls.
Drummond.
Like yeah, Drummond, like that was exactly it. That was his third or his fourth, and he like they didn't get the rebound, and he just mugged the guy from behind.
Yeah.
So that's clearly a foul. And same thing, like Karl Anthony Towns was at 4, and then he just tried to like steamroll through 3 people, like head down, like just bashing through. So that's his 5th foul, and then his 6th foul came in a similar way, and like as a whole, and Jaren Jackson Jr. did one too, where same thing, like he just made a poor decision when he was already sitting on 3 or 4 fouls, and that's like when you talk about winning basketball, that's another thing that really stands out to me is some players can do it and some can't. Is that extra decision making piece?
Yes. I mean, like, when you make those type of like a fouls, like quote unquote dumb fouls, like it's a lack of awareness for the moment, if that makes sense. I mean, the players are just so into the game that like Drummond, he's like, I've got to fight for the rebound as hard as I can. It's like, well, maybe you shouldn't get your fourth foul with 4 minutes left in the second quarter. Just let it go.
And especially given like you specified for Drummond, he's so valuable for his team because they're already so small.
Definitely.
Like they already can't get a rebound, so then to have Drummond also, like you said, like get that 4th foul, it's brutal because even though he's not like a star player, his value to the team is worth more than that. Let alone if Karl Anthony Towns does it or Jaren Jackson Jr. or something.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure.
In a playoff matchup, you need absolutely everyone. Like, and the Raptors, like we obviously saw that in our big championship run, and you saw it with the Bucks. Like, you just need every single player because on any given night, having one player do an incredible thing could win you an important game.
Yeah. And I mean, like I think we were just talking about this a little bit earlier, but at least in the playoffs, the volume of foul calls are just amplified by the way the game is played and its intensity. So you'll see pretty much almost every playoff game, a few players foul out. Well, and in the regular season, you might have zero.
Right, exactly. And you'll see like too lots of players like taking charges who you normally don't see take a charge at all, but you'll see them step in and take one. You see people taking charges going over screens and in like open court and transition. Like it's just because there's so much more on the line. It's such a physical game that to pick up that extra random foul can be really costly down the stretch.
Oh, for sure. And
So that's going to bring us to our final point here, which I'm actually not going to go with an interesting tweet of the week or something along those lines. I'm going to go with something funny that I saw, which is I was watching a game that Richard Jefferson was calling. I think it was the Minnesota game. And they went and there was a blocking foul and they called it a blocking foul, and it was like pretty clearly upon the first replay a blocking foul. Like when they showed it on the broadcast, I was like, oh yeah, that's a blocking foul. The player was moving, he didn't get in and set the charge. And block charge is like a tricky thing to challenge anyway because it's kind of more up to discretion.
hmm
So I'd never really use a challenge on a block charge. But the Memphis Grizzlies had their challenge still, and the Timberwolves didn't. And Memphis decided they were going to challenge this call. And they showed the replay on the broadcast. And obviously, it's the assistant coaches on the team that make the call to challenge it. Like they'll signal to the head coach because they're looking at iPads or whatever that we're going to challenge it, right?
Yep.
And as they were going to break, Richard Jefferson was commentating the game, and he goes, "Why would you waste a challenge on that?" And I thought that was so funny because normally, obviously, and Richard Jefferson's like relatively new to his broadcasting career, but normally you don't hear commentators take a side to that extent, right? Because they're supposed media members are supposed to be more neutral. But he just said exactly what I was thinking, which is after watching the replay one singular time, it was very clear. Why would you waste a charge or a challenge on that?
Yeah. Do you know how much time was left in the game for that call?
Like 8 minutes in the
Okay,
third.
so it's not even, yeah, like a Hail Mary challenge.
No, and they had literally talked about earlier in advance too that the Timberwolves had already lost their challenge and it was a close game and Memphis has one and the Timberwolves don't, and how valuable that is,
Yeah,
right? And then boom, like 3 minutes later, they blew it on some random block charge, which was clearly a block.
like again, it's just
So
unforced errors. Like
exactly,
only one team can win the chip, and to put yourself in the best situation, don't take dumb fouls, don't waste your charges, don't have lapses, and just give your best shot.
exactly. That's so true. And I just thought it was so interesting the way Richard Jefferson
He just
framed it.
called it out.
I thought that was hilarious. It was one of my favorite things. Like I actually laughed out loud while I was watching that game. So that's all we've got this week for, I guess that's episode 17 of the In the Clutch podcast, and the first one with a guest and the first one without Jer. So we loved having you on, Mitch. It was great to have you around this time.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Let me know if you ever want to come back, eh? We'd love to get you back
Oh,
on here.
sounds good. Will do.
All right. We'd like to thank everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Alrighty, go Raps.
Absolutely. Go Raps, go.